from each other.
Okay, so let's start.
But there are two doors in between. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, oh, Anton's gonna go first. Okay.
Yeah, maybe a short introduction. Hallie has been working with me now for a number of years on various films and publications projects and so forth. She studied art history at Vassar College with Molly Nesbitt, which is where I met her. Molly Nesbitt is a kind of a really important American art historian who is written quite a lot on photographers like Ayres, but many other artists. So this is somebody that's actually quite close to Ethos and somebody that we've been collaborating with for a very long time. And Hallie was lucky, I think, to study with Molly. But now we work together, and she helped, she basically edited the new issue of the Cosmic Bulletin, which is an online publication of the Institute of the Cosmos. You got the link to it, so I really highly recommend reading this new issue because it contains quite amazing texts. The idea with this bulletin is to, most of the time it works through open call, but also by invitation, yes? So basically the first issue was actually almost entirely an open call. The new issue is a kind of a mixture of some things that we received through an open call, certain essays that we came across and that have never been translated to English, so we translated and published them. And then also there were a couple of people that were specifically invited to write something new for us. And this is something that will continue. Hopefully next year there will be the third issue of the Cosmic Bulletin and so forth. And the idea is to kind of continue exploring cosmism and its effect on, art, culture, life, in a kind of a very open way. Yeah, it's not a dogmatic publication that is concerned with the orthodoxy of cosmism or like a very strict definition of what it is, but it's open to experimental writing, experimental poetry, different genres of writing and different approach to this very, very complex topic. So yes, also Hallie helped produce the film that I showed you in Prague, the Gilgamesh film. So she's really somebody that's been very, very close and working very, very closely on a whole number of projects over the past 3 years or so. So maybe this is enough of an introduction.
Okay, works for me. Yeah, I do have a little PowerPoint that I can share. Oh, here it is. Let me just share the screen. Sorry, 1 second, make sure this is the right one. Sorry, I have to allow Zoom access.
That's all right.
Okay. Oh wait, maybe I have to rejoin. 1 second, I'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back, sorry. Okay, here we go. Okay, you can see it?
Yes, yes.
Great. Okay, yeah. So I guess the title of the lecture, I'll call it Cosmic Collisions. And yeah, going off of what Anton said about the cosmic bulletin and the sort of experimental lens of cosmism, that was something that I did try to really highlight in this publication, this issue of the Bulletin, because something that I learned through the editorial process as well was just the very multivalent ways that cosmism can be used as a lens of analysis. So there are a lot of texts in this issue of the Bulletin that it wouldn't necessarily seem cosmist at first glance, but the connections are kind of totally there and almost overwhelmingly so. So I wanted to actually talk through first, just kind of give an overview of the Bulletin, because I hope all of you will explore it, but I think it would be nice to introduce some of the text in it. And then from there, I'll jump off and talk about some other things. Okay, so let's see if I can, okay, yeah. So this is it. And then this is just the first 6. But yeah, you can find it on this website, cosmos.art. So there were a couple of sort of concrete poetry additions to it. This one by Jyoti Arvi is told from the perspective of Lenin's embalmed body. And it uses a series of quotations you can see that are from other like Soviet intellectuals. So it's reanimating Lenin's body, but also reanimating the intellectual corpus that Lenin spurned. And then there's another type of experimental poem. This is by Ali Vaughn, and it's a digitized typewritten scroll that is ruminating on connections that have a very biocosmist ideal of becoming self-feeding and becoming plant-like. Throughout the scroll, there's a lot of references to eating, consumption, appetite, and this is all in sort of a very cosmist rhythm of existence. And both of these poems actually, I think, kind of prolong this legacy of experimental forms of writing that was devised by Soviet theater makers and poets in the 1910s and 20s. For example, the transrational language of Zaum, which is built around the idea that language should sound good. So words are constructed by what is sonically appealing rather than necessarily tying words to what they signify. And this, especially this scroll by Ali Vaughn, does a lot of the same sort of rhythmic practice with language. So then next, there are a few translated texts, newly translated into English, about Ukrainian cosmism. One is by Katya Yakovlenko, and she's taking an art historical view, Ukrainian art from the 1950s to the present. And she's trying to identify what distinguishes Ukrainian cosmism from Fyodorov's cosmism. And she delineates 2 tendencies. One is the depiction of apocalypse, especially in a post-Chernobyl landscape. And then the other is imaginations of utopian schemes that are transcending time and place. And she identifies a very Ukrainian conception of external and internal space, which she claims has material foundations in the communal apartments that were a hallmark of Soviet life. So then another Ukrainian cosmism text is by Nikita Kalan and Yuri Lederman. And this focuses on, this is a transcript of a recorded presentation that they gave on the occasion of a show of work by Nikita and the person who's pictured whose name was Fedor Fripulia Tetianich. And he was an artist active in Ukraine in mostly in the 1980s and 90s. And he straddled the performance and sculpture genres and made a lot of art out of found materials, as you can see. And most of his art really resists an archival impulse because he just collected everything. He had a very egalitarian sense of collecting material. And this is also what Nikita and Yuri find that's distinctly Ukrainian in his cosmism, is he didn't depend on objects selected and curated in a museum as a basis for that, which would eventually be resurrected. Instead, he saw all of Earth as a manifestation of a resurrection that had already happened. And we just needed to realize this. And that's what he was doing in his art practice. So then next, also on the subject of a resurrection, this text by Anna Gorskaya, who is a librarian at the Fyodorov Museum Library in Moscow. She visited this man, Father Andrei Dudarev, at the Mayakovsky Cottage Museum, which is just outside of Moscow. In May of this year, Dudarev found the gravesite of Vasily Chekrygin, and he was an artist and theorist who died in 1922, and his gravesite had been lost since the 1930s. And through this guy Dudarev's quest to locate and preserve Chekrygin's remains, he kind of is enacting Fyodorov's conception of a museum of resurrection, and he's taking memory and imagination as his primary tools. Then there are a few texts that elaborate a bit more on cosmist tendencies within Soviet art and aesthetics. The first is Marcus Hurwitz's, and he's talking about the cosmist common task as it relates to the suprematist goal to radically transform the entire architecture of the world. Then there's Alessandra Franitovich looks to film, and she analyzes two films by the Soviet science fiction filmmaker Konstantin Lopushansky. And this is in order for Alessandra to postulate on different uses for the structure of the museum in times of apocalypse or global crisis. For example, within the past couple of years, museums, due to the pandemic, have been turned over to sites of mutual aid formation or vaccine centers. And because our environment now is something akin to a science fiction plot, Alessandra is looking to science fiction film to see what possible alternatives to the museum space might exist in really kind of crazy circumstances like the one we're living through. Also working with science fiction, this text by Thoti examines the novels We by Evgeny Zamyatin and The Foundation Pit by Andrei Platonov. And in order to trace the strains of Sophiology, which is the Russian Orthodox school of thought that claims that the cosmos is suffused with the divine wisdom of God. So then there are also a couple short works of fiction. There's this story by Sanya Sarman about a sailor who gets totally entranced by a captain who has emerald eyes, and his voyage with this captain leads him down this path of growing disillusionment with the prospect of immortality. And then this text by Miriam Hilahi Abraham and Nasra Abdullahi is kind of like notes to the theoretical foundations of a short story of theirs that's actually in the library section of the cosmos.art site. But the text in the bulletin is sort of explicating their research process behind the writing of the short story. And they elaborate on their use of the symbol of the astrolabe, which was a navigational device. And they're using it as a means of troubling established cartographies, especially from the geography of the Horn of Africa, which is where they're both from. And they focus on this guy, the historic character of Leo Africanus, who was a 16th century Moroccan writer. And they depict him as something of a time traveler because he's going on these diplomatic missions between Europe and Africa, and he's carrying with him diverging geographies and timescales as he's doing so. So he's almost transcending time and space, and in a way embodying an existence that takes the individual body as a measuring tool, which is kind of a foundational tenet for their Afro-cosmologist treatise. Then there are two texts left. Okay, yeah, so there's this one by Natalia Delone. And these last two texts are exploring the limits and consequences of human interference in the natural landscape. So with Natalia is actually a genetics researcher who's now 98 years old and sort of miraculously still producing theoretical texts. But in this text, she writes on the urgency to synthesize the 4 component spheres she identifies within the biosphere. So these are the intellect sphere, the realm of the rational, the pantheosphere, the realm of the spirit, the emotional sphere, the realm of emotions, and then the technosphere, which is the realm of technological activity. And she identifies this crisis that the technosphere has advanced far beyond the other 3 spheres. And that's the cause for global instability. And the only way to regain a sense of harmony within the biosphere is to integrate these spheres of civilization through a process of rational and egalitarian globalization. And then lastly, this text by Mayana Redden, which actually opens the issue. I'll talk a little bit more in depth about it because I'm going to use one of her points to jump off onto the next topic. But so it's about this Soviet cosmonaut, Vladimir Kumarov, who you might know was the first person to be killed in a spaceflight accident. And this was in 1967. And what happened was a parachute failed to deploy. And so he died in this very fiery crash. And this charred lump is supposedly his remains that were discovered in the crash. And so Mayana uses this charred lump to build an argument that's based off its relation to monsters of the industrial age, like Frankenstein and Dracula. And these technical accidents respond in proportion to machines rather than to humans. So like Kumarov died not simply because he was in space, but because he was in a spaceship in space. So that's the argument that Mayana is making. And she goes on and discusses a range of topics. I hope you'll all read all these texts. But at one point, she compares Kumarov's corpse to a meteorite and uses this analogy to reflect on the process by which something becomes, or something does or does not become an artifact. So she writes, I'll quote her, that the word cadaver stems etymologically from the Latin cadere, which is to drop or to fall, and it's related to the Portuguese adjective cadente, which is employed to describe celestial bodies that break from their orbits and fall into larger objects attracted by their gravitational fields. That is to say, meteorites. So Kumarov is quite literally cadente, or a falling star. And then she goes on to discuss the revolutionary French communist Louis Auguste Blanqui, and he draws the analogy between a falling star and a corpse as well in 1871 in a treaty called Eternity by the Stars. And he refers to meteorites and asteroids as icy cadavers. And while he was held in captivity in an isolated fortress, all he could see were stars going above his head. And he drew between these metaphors, he used these falling stars to draw a metaphor to political insurrection. And so, Mayana writes that what might seem at first glance a merely formal approximation between terminologies used in both fields shows an even closer relation between them, a call to organize revolutionary masses in accordance with the entropic organizational logic of the universe. Blanqui realized that the law of gravity, the same law that kept celestial bodies in harmonious revolution, was also what constantly threatened those bodies with the unpredictable trajectories of meteorites and asteroids. When these collisions did occur, Blanqui referred to them as resurrecting shocks, acknowledging the critically generative aspect of these accidents. And this is a quote from Blanqui: "When the stars are atomized into a sidereal encounter, all their substances fuse into the gaseous mass that springs from the shock. Then the organizing activity of the nebula slowly separates them according to the laws of gravity." So for Blanqui, these resurrecting shocks are necessary to revitalize stable celestial bodies from their fatal destiny, which is their eventual cooling and thermal death. And it's this order that is maintained by the laws of gravity that keeps the universe from being bored to death. So in other words, these resurrecting shocks, these celestial bodies crashing into each other, are totally necessary in order to disturb this established order of the universe. And this is what Blanqui draws as an analogy to like the necessity for political insurrection. And here's I have another quote by him. So such encounters between sidereal cadavers colliding into resurrection would easily come across as a disturbance of the established order, a disturbance. But what would become of the world if the ancient and dead suns with their string of defunct planets continued indefinitely their funereal procession, reinforced every night with the arrival of new funerals? All the sources of light and of life that shine in the heavens would extinguish gradually, like the luminaries of a light show. Eventual darkness or eternal darkness would wash upon the universe. So I want to use this image of Blanqui's by way of Mayana's text, this image of the resurrecting shocks that occur when objects in space collide to disturb the pre-established order of things, as a way to explicate some more things about that I think are inherently present within a cosmist ethos, especially as I hope like cosmism can be read as suffused with a political insurgency. So just like Blanqui's conception of revolution took the form of like a highly organized coup d'etat, which is a political collision in the most elevated degree. I'm going to say, let's stick with this idea of collisions for a moment and see what else we can bring out of it. So first off, this guy, the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, posited that the world was composed of just atoms and voids. And this is an illustration of that. And this is like the 4th century BCE, ancient Greek guy. But he suggested that these atoms were in perpetual free fall until one swerves and collides into another. And this collision forms matter. And this is the matter that forms our universe. And this atomic swerve, in a philosophical sense, was Epicurus's way of claiming that humans have free will. So if atoms that are otherwise in a deterministic universe can decide to randomly swerve, then so should humans. And then another theoretical conception of collisions, here we go. This is Edouard Bisson, a contemporary, though now deceased, I think he died in 2011, theorist. And his conception of utopia was something that's constantly quivering or trembling as it is transcending established schools of thought. And his theory of the world, his kind of like world building activity is rooted in the ways in which difference between people and cultures can allow people to change without losing or denaturing themselves. And these changes arise through collisions of cultural exchange. He termed this like new region of the world, the whole world. And I have a quote from a lecture from him in 2007. He said, "No region of the world is truly unknown. The explorers have done their work well, but there is in the world another region of the world, one that we have not much frequented because we must pass through it together. It is this very improbable whole world, and some have had knowledge of it." So he's propositioning that through collision and quivering is how we grow toward this new region of the world together. I want to touch and especially note his language here. He's talking about explorers having like already explored the entire world. And I want to speak a little bit about these explorers because so they were operating using these navigational techniques that depend on a horizon line, on linear perspective. So in order to achieve Glissant's new region of the world, we have to somehow explore in a way that does not necessarily depend on linear perspective. And this shift in perspective would be another of these collisions or these tremors that push us closer to utopia. And this new perspective must inherently be four-dimensional, granting a place for time as well. And then also must acknowledge the importance of differing viewpoints from all angles. And then to stick on linear perspective for a moment, because it helps conceptualize the ocean in a way that I'm going to talk about in a second. But I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with how Hito Steyerl famously categorized linear perspective. She said that it transforms space, but also the notion of linear time, because it allows for prediction, and that allows for a means of measuring progress. So if we do away with linear perspective, then according to Hito Steyerl, we would move toward a world of free fall, where the prospect of a future that can be neatly determined disappears. And then the quest to understand a comprehensive formulation of time comes forward. And to quote Hito on free fall, she says, pilots have reported that free fall can trigger a feeling of confusion between the self and the aircraft. While falling, people may sense themselves as being things, while things may sense that they are people. Traditional modes of seeing and feeling are shattered. any sense of balance is disrupted. Perspectives are twisted and multiplied. New types of visuality arise. So these new types of visuality, these new modes of relating to each other, and even these atoms that are breaking free from determinism to develop new infrastructures for the universe, all of these are moments of collision, or they arise out of collision and send tremors of change that ripple through systems of cultural givens. And these moments of collision, can affect anything, in a sense, from the overthrow of a government to the discarding of linear perspective. And I think this can serve as a really generative viewpoint for how, or a blueprint also for how cosmism might operate in this same sort of mode. Because these tremors, these collisions are occurring on various scales within time and space. And when people discuss cosmism now, and how it might find applications today, a common response is that immortality, much like modern cures for diseases, will most likely not be achieved suddenly, but will be achieved, or like a product of a multitude of small beneficial changes in infrastructure and technology that happen over time, occasionally even by accident. For example, the implementation of universal health care can be read as a cosmist initiative because it slowly but surely prolongs people's lives. And with each of these small changes, these small tremors and collisions, we grow nearer to a speculative future. And then eventually that speculation transforms into infrastructure, and then a new set of givens for the world. And this is the process of like slow revolution. So I want to elaborate now on this question of time and revolution and revolutionary time, because Fyodorov desired to collapse this distinction between past, present, and future. And in immortality, all time would be collective time, since immortality also heralds the elimination of the personal lifetime, which is like the last vestige of private property to be overcome. So if we can grant that the cosmos quest for immortality functions along the sort of slow revolution timescale, in that it consists of a series of collisions and tremors that bring us ever closer to achieving the common task, then I think the question is, where can we identify examples of these revolutionary collisions that embody this ethos of a collective time, like in the same way that we can identify something like universal healthcare as an example of this ethos. The possible answer that I'm going to propose is that we can find this in people who are like living on stolen time or borrowed time. And this is like the ill, people who have survived things that should have killed them, outlaws. In the introduction to the Cosmic Bulletin that I wrote, I focused on one subset of outlaws, which is pirates. And I talked about them as exemplars of a particularly political cosmist ethos. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and then I'll wrap it up. So the vast majority of pirates, especially during the golden age of piracy on the Atlantic, which was between the 1650s to 1720s, they were former merchant marines or members of royal navies who had been continuously mistreated and exploited by their captains. I think it would be quite dishonest to claim that pirates were just roving gangs of criminals, because they did actually view themselves as avengers of the common sailor, and they had like very grounded reasons for defecting to piracy. also, when they seized the vessel, they were not only redistributing material resources that the vessel was carrying, but they were also offering a chance at liberation to the vessel's sailors. And also during this golden age, pirates were actually continuously disrupting flows of commerce between continents, to the point that there are letters being written by merchants to the Board of Trade in the United Kingdom, begging them to please do something about the piracy crisis. But anyway, whenever pirates seized control of a ship, their first order of business was a redistribution of justice. And this involved constraining the captain on board and calling all the crew up on board. And they would ask the crew, how does your captain treat you? And depending on the answer that they received from the crew, they would mete out justice. And yeah, to varying degrees, depending on what the crew said. There is one recorded example of the crew really singing the praises of their captain. And in that case, the pirates did let the captain go and also returned all the goods on the ship to the captain. So it was a system of justice. It wasn't like these were just bloodthirsty pirates out for whatever they could get. But anyway, after, these are just more pirates. After this distribution of justice, the pirates would take on any sailors who wanted to leave their exploitative workplace behind. And then whenever pirates mutinied on a ship on which they had been toiling, they would hold democratic elections to select a council of captains and a quartermaster, who's kind of like an onboard magistrate. And the role of the quartermaster is really just to keep the captains in check. And there are examples of pirate ships electing to depose captains who were abusing their power. So it was a very egalitarian type of social environment. They also split all of the goods that they took from commandeering other ships. They split it all evenly. So in this very like social interpretation of piracy, pirates not only represented an early form of democracy, but they also were approaching maritime existence with like a radically life-affirming approach. While they were under sail, the quartermaster, the onboard magistrate, kept very strict limitations in place in order to curb violence among the crew. They generally operated with the understanding that all conflicts should be like figured out once they again reached land. So they were symbolically displacing conflict from the sea, so that it didn't detract from this egalitarian floating world that they were constructing. And then also their choice in flag, it'll come up, the Jolly Roger. Here it is. Okay. It's basically an invitation for public execution, for hanging if pirates are caught. But it also indicated the extent to which pirates would rather live in freedom as outlaws on like stolen time, even if only for a brief period of time, instead of continue to labor within grossly exploitative systems. And the Skull and Crossbones actually comes from the insignia that captains drew in their logbooks next to the names of sailors who had prematurely died while on a voyage. So in one sense, they're kind of reclaiming this symbol that when they fly it and their targets see it, it's like, oh, your time is up. But they're also reminding themselves that death is always fast approaching. And this is what inspired in them this politics for living, like a politics for living that values freedom over exploitation. And then the material and ideological consequences of living on stolen time. And this is generally like time that the average exploited worker doesn't have access to unless they mutiny, or time that an outlaw lives in because they know that their liberation is diametrically opposed to the desires of the state. This is what, living on stolen time, I guess, is like nothing shy of seeding revolution, planting the tremors of revolution. And this tradition of maritime radicalism actually did have like major impacts that, can be read through the ethos of cosmism. For one, there was a huge naval mutiny in the 1790s in the British, Dutch, and French navies. But then also, this is a depiction of a riot in 1747 in Boston. This naval captain was trying to force sailors to join the Navy, and they didn't want to join the Navy, so they rioted throughout the streets of the Boston harbor. This Boston, Massachusetts in the US. And this guy, Samuel Adams, was watching all of this, and Samuel Adams wrote about these riots, that it became clear to him that people have inalienable rights. And when those rights are being infringed upon, you have to do something, you have to fight back in order to preserve your rights. And this actually 20 years later became the guiding principle of the American Revolution. So this guy was watching these sailors enact what he would later help to make transpire, and whatever, American Revolution. Anyway, so I guess the point of that is that like these tremors in radicalism, in maritime radicalism, did have kind of revolutionary impacts on much larger scales. Okay, so it's these series of revolutions of everyday life, the like smaller collisions within established cultural givens or the entrenched political systems that I think in a revolutionary cosmos sense are the sorts of increments that are incremental changes that lead to a future that prioritizes total freedom and autonomy as a means of prolonging life. I guess I'll end it there. Okay.
Thank you, Hallie. So we can open discussions. Students can ask questions. Daria has a question. Go on.
Thank you so much for your lecture. I also wanted to say that I really enjoyed Bulletin, and it was surprising for me to find such a lot of information about Ukrainian cosmism, and it was a big luck for me because 1 year ago I tried to make my own research, and mentions and the information was kind of limited a lot or blended together with the Russian cosmism. So it was really interesting for me to read the things in the Bulletin. I wanted to ask you, I really liked the comparison you made about cosmism and pirates. And you said that it's played rather it's decide to play rather the role of a combatant than a victim. And I found it's like yeah, I'm completely agree with it, but also I found that's another similarity that both pirates and cosmism like have a strong patriarchal structure in it, and like pirates are so like have so male dominant and male exclusive structure, and for cosmism as well, there are like in Fyodorov text, he talking about resurrecting fathers, even like if it's metaphorically, but anyway, like it's really interesting, like the way he choosing the words, and of course, whole tendency for colonizing, conquering, inhabiting, and gaining power. Like I found it's also like kind of patriarchal in a way. So I wanted to ask you if you believe is something like maybe continuation or new reading of cosmism in a way of like femenocosmism, like if you believe in a step from this patriarchal pirate-like structure to something new, to cosmism, like where equality in a way, or yeah, like some feminocosmism is possible. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed the bulletin. Yeah, I definitely totally agree. It's possible. I think in the sense of pirates, obviously sailing at the time was just a hugely male-dominated workforce. But I think that these political structures that they were building, ones that were totally in line with an egalitarian ethos, that doesn't preclude anything based on gender, you know, like this sort of political system would still have the same the same ethos to it, regardless. I think this is just kind of one application of it that happens to be male dominated. For Fyodorov, I think it's probably fairly a similar response in that, well, also for him, he was so entrenched in like the Book of Revelations, and he was a very deeply pious man. And this was kind of the reading of all of that at the time, was that it was patriarchal. But yeah, I think the point that I hope to make with drawing the comparison to the pirates is that this cosmos lens can be separated from something that in the past was like patriarchal, and can be then applied to systems of egalitarian governance or systems of autonomy and liberation that adhere to whatever purpose it needs to in the contemporary age. So yeah, I mean, I think it's totally possible. I think it's also possible without detracting from like the foundations of cosmism, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was like really curious, and I think it's kind of unknown or undiscovered like side of cosmism, this feminine like side. And I suddenly, after I read your introduction, I got really like interested in a way like how to make it possible, or how to read it. Thank you.
Sweet. Yeah, let me know what you find.
Also, I have like one like practical question. It's more about Bulletin, but I was interested in a way of the editor position. You know, how much curating how much curating doing editor and how much curating doing somebody else, like was a choice of people, or like this, like you said, open call invitations was completely your choice, or it's some group who deciding on it? So how like a private choice it was? Thank you.
Yeah, so the previous edition was based on an open call. So yeah, we just stuck with that for how to structure it. But as Anton mentioned previously, there were a couple texts that we had just translated, and those were ones that, you know, we sought out. We asked these people if we can translate them, but the rest of them were just the open call. And I think it was really quite fascinating to see what all came through in the open call, especially in a way that, I mean, we were able to reach networks of people that we would never have had we been just sort of selectively curating based on what we knew was out there. And I think that's why we got such a broad range of topics. Yeah, that proved really quite incredible. So I guess it was, I mean, by choice, yeah, but I was happy that the open call was a large aspect of it.
Yeah, thank you. I also found somehow, like today I read about text of Katerina Yakovenko, like about the Ukrainian Kusmism. And I found out that it was like the sketch for it, or like the first version was done in 2017 when the exhibition happened. But I only found it like, and I only read it like connected to this year and connected to Cosmic Bulletin. So I found that in, like with the Cosmic Bulletin, it's like was more accepted as was more available somehow for readers. And even I was in the exhibition and I was interested in the topic, but like through this source, yeah, it was the first time I got the access to this text.
Oh, that's cool. Very cosmist of us. Yeah, it's funny also because in her text, she cites the text by Nikita and Yuri, but as it had originally been published in Ukrainian, so it was nice we were able to publish both of those and have them in conversation as well.
Any other questions to? So maybe I will ask. I was also surprised by connection between pirates and cosmism. I would like to know how you find a way to connect it, or what was the direction you were led by?
Yeah, sure.
Because it's quite surprising for me.
Yeah, so it actually came because over the summer, in the weekends, I work on a sailboat. And so at some point, I was speaking with my captain, and we got onto the topic of pirates. And there's a really, really amazing historian of Atlantic history named Marcus Rediker. He's a Marxist historian, and he's written 5 or so books about pirates, about Atlantic history at large. He's written a lot about the slave ship also, and then just general sort of outlaw culture in like the maritime sense. So I started reading his books, and I was just totally blown away. I really, really recommend those as well. But it was at the same time that I was editing the bulletin, and I just started drawing these connections between the ways in which pirates are hoping to prolong their lives and have to engage in this sort of radical revolutionary activity in order to do so. And it was, it's coming up in Cosmism. So it was almost sort of just a nice coincidence that it happened. But yeah, Marcus Rediker's books were a huge influence there.
Thank you. Can you maybe put this name in the chat?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I'll also put
Marcus Rediker.
That's the website for the Bulletin. The whole Institute of the Cosmos is there at cosmos.art.
Do you think it's possible to compare it somehow to like internet pirates who steals informational products and make it possible for people to get it for free?
Yeah, I think so. This is like the next avenue that I'm trying to think about. But I definitely think there's something there as well. I mean, it's also like, I think it's more than just a coincidence that these people are called pirates as well. So there's definitely something there.
And for me, it reminds me one quote. It was not Fedorov. It was some of Cosmists who follow him. And it was a quote about that the real miracle is the one we didn't deserve and we didn't work to gain it. So that that works with like internet pirates somehow. Miracle.
Totally, yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of hard for me to connect with the Cosmis, like internet pirates and Cosmis. But I got this association immediately. Like,
yeah, it'll be fun to think about next.
So is there any other questions, Hallie? Looks like one has a question, more questions.
Yeah, maybe me. It's maybe not like a question because, but I'm really thinking about what you said, and for me, like a period structure, like a social structure, like on one boat or some kind of the like a system of a boat, it's still for me like some hierarchy according the age and something like this. And for me, it's like very close to my thinking about some time perspective or something like this. But in Cosmism, we still thinking, and maybe all of us, we still thinking about some kind of the, like a crushing the time or the time systems. And I still thinking about the new hierarchy. If I put some kind of the system of the pirates, like a distribution of the justice, and try to switch to some new cosmic space and new cosmic society, but without so strong like a time narrative or like a age, like distributing the system and the social hierarchy according to age. I still think, do you think it should be very different in the like Cosmos, because I think the narrative of the age hierarchy should be different. And sorry, it's not like a whole question, but maybe do you see some kind of the like maybe connection between the age hierarchy in the pirate structures and also in like a future social structure in the Cosmism?
Yeah, so I suppose this is like related to sorry, one moment. So this is kind of like how the span of a lifetime is like a private property. So if we are abolishing the lifetime, then in some sense, age kind of loses its relevance, right?
Yeah.
So that would be what I think. Yeah. Yeah, like in some ways it just kind of, it becomes something that's not even a component of a hierarchy anymore, right? I don't know if that fully answers the question.
No. But I think, yeah, for my not fully question, not fully answer yet. Yeah, totally. But I will be thinking for a long time about this. Thank you.
Yeah.
So is there any other questions? If not, we will thank Hallie for her talk.
Would you
Looks
like to
yeah,
be resurrected,
Yeah, Daria, go on.
Hallie?
Would I like to be resurrected?
Yeah, when Anton was in Prague, we had this discussion with the studio about resurrection. And then we had kind of after discussion, and I found out for myself that a lot of students like told me that they just don't wanna, and that it would be nice kind of to end it. So I was interested about people who writing texts about cosmism and researching cosmism. Are there like sharing these dreams, and would you like to be theoretically resurrected?
I don't think so. No, but one time someone, actually one of the authors, Ali Vaughn, who wrote the scroll, asked Anton and me if we would prefer to travel in time to the future or the past. And Anton, you said the future and I said the past. Maybe that's where we diverge.
Oh, thank you. I thought I would like to travel to past, but only if I will not be women. Like it's really important, I think, because it's probably was really terrible. So I wasn't able to do like I will not be able to do anything. I probably will already have like 6 kids and we'll just clean house and do something like this. So yeah,
Right.
I think it's an important option for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Isn't it the direction future is going through the past? Maybe it's the
yeah, we can't be so literal, so linear about it.
Yeah. Okay, Hallie, so probably we're gonna thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank
Anton,
you.
would you like to comment something? No, probably.
No, just want to remind people that we should probably meet on Friday. At the same time, which is what?
At the same time like today, or because we used to meet at
what?
Like 2 hours earlier.
Yeah, 2 hours earlier is better. Yeah, so at 10 o'clock.
4 in the afternoon, 4 p.m. our time.
Sounds good. And if you could think a little bit more about some ideas about what we talked about in terms of final presentation, because that's what I would like to discuss, or start the conversation about. Yeah, that would be really great.
Okay, let's do it.
See you all on Friday. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. See you on Friday.